I did not have high expectations for those who would vote against the USMCA, Donald Trump's big new trade deal to replace NAFTA, because this is the sort of thing where generally Democrats and Republicans in elected government come together and forget if it's bad for American workers, if it's bad for the environment, all of that. But we might be seeing some progress. Now, I can't say how this is going to end up going in the end, but I can say that I do have some hope. And that is because despite the fact that earlier this week when Bernie Sanders was joined by only 3 other Democrats in the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, that's Senators Gillibrand, Markey, and Whitehouse in voting against it, now that it's moving to the next step, there might be some allies joining that group. Now, I want to take you to from where I think we started to how we got to where we're at right now. And understand that at this week's debate, the USMCA came up and Bernie Sanders distinguished himself by being the only senator who went hardcore, said, I'm not gonna vote for it, and gave an awesome explanation as to why. Let's take a look.
The answer is we could do much better than a Trump-led trade deal. This deal, and I think the proponents of it acknowledge, will result in the continuation of the loss of hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs as a result of outsourcing. The heart and soul of our disastrous trade agreements, and I'm the guy who voted against NAFTA and against permanent normal trade relations with China, is that we have forced American workers to compete against people in Mexico, in China, elsewhere, who earn starvation wages, $1 or $2 an hour. Second of all, every major environmental organization has said no to this new trade agreement because it does not even have the phrase climate change in it. And given the fact that climate change is right now the greatest threat facing this planet, I will not vote for a trade agreement that does not incorporate very, very strong principles to significantly lower fossil fuel emissions in the world.
But Senator Sanders, to be clear, the AFL-CIO supports this deal. Are you unwilling to compromise?
The AFL-CIO does, the Machinists Union does not, and every environmental organization in this country, including the Sunrise organization, who are supporting my candidacy, opposes it. So I happen to believe, and I hope we will talk about climate change in a moment, if we do not get our act together in terms of climate change, the planet that we're going to be leaving our kids and our children and our grandchildren will be increasingly unlivable and uninhabitable.
We're going to get to climate change, but I'd like to stay on trade.
And what's cut off there, unfortunately, is he says they're the same issue. And the thing is, that moderator says we're gonna get to climate change. Yeah, good luck, don't hold your breath, okay? They eventually circled around a little bit to it, but the vast majority of the conversation at that debate about climate change was brought up by the candidates themselves. It was one of the lowest priorities for the moderators there. And so thankfully he did bring it up because these are not disconnected issues. Now, it wasn't the entirety of what he focused on in his opposition to the USMCA. He brings up that it is by no means a uniform position that all unions think that, okay, we're in such hard times that even if this isn't a great deal, even if we think we get something much better under a president like Bernie Sanders, there are at least some positives here. That's true, but there's also a ton of negatives. And it is very much a muddled picture when you look at a number of different unions in terms of their support or opposition to this bill. And so I'm glad that he pointed that out and of course brought it back to the fact that of course it's not gonna be good for the climate crisis. It doesn't even mention the climate crisis, even though a trade deal like this is one of the best ways that the United States can not only help to constrain their own emissions, but also put pressure on other countries, Canada and Mexico and others, to do the same. So this is not just a bill, it has an opportunity cost. If we pass this, it makes it measurably more difficult to pass some other trade bill that would be better for the working class, but also better for the climate under a future administration, perhaps a future Sanders administration. That is why this needs to be stopped so that it can be replaced by something better in the future. And so advocacy is important. That was great from Bernie Sanders right there. He got credit from the Sunrise Movement, which he gave a shout out to. After that response, they tweeted, we're grateful to Bernie Sanders for standing with us against the USMCA trade deal, which is bad for the climate and for American workers. It's one of the many reasons we're grateful to stand with him too. And what's important about this is that he has been outspoken for months and months against this deal. Organizations like the Sunrise Movement also have been against it for months. And that sort of advocacy is important for putting pressure on more centrist senators to take a stand against that. And we actually have an update that I would not have expected. Chuck Schumer has announced that he is going to be voting against it as well. He tweeted, despite the improvements Democrats secured to better protect workers, I am voting against USMCA because it doesn't address climate change, the greatest threat facing our planet. So look, Bernie Sanders gave him credit for that. Right before we went live, AOC said thank you to Senator Schumer, and in particular points out how long lasting the USMCA would be. And so there would be a lot of opportunity for damage to be done to our climate during that time. Now, we can speculate, and we will speculate about why exactly Chuck Schumer did this. He has previously talked about his concerns on the climate change in the USMCA, so it is not a complete about face. But it is possible that he is looking to the future, and he knows that across the country, climate change is motivating more and more political behavior. And a potential primary challenge against him, if he was on the record voting for pieces of legislation like the USMCA, that could come back to bite him in the future. Perhaps even against some of the congressional New Yorkers like AOC, who hypothetically could run for the Senate in the future. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.